So, it's streaming live. Okay. So I was just gonna, before we get started, because I don't know everybody who's here, and I can't necessarily see everybody who's here, but if people are okay, I guess this is being broadcast. So
no, it's on an unlisted link, which has been given to no one. So it's just being recorded on YouTube servers.
Okay. So, but it is available for members to watch. So I would just say, in terms of introducing yourself, whatever you feel comfortable saying is fine. So maybe if we can start. It's so weird on Zoom. I don't understand why this is. If I log in not through my actual account, but just click on the link, it just says Steve Nathan. But then when I log in through Lehigh and then click on the link, it says Steve Nathan with my pronouns afterwards.
Strange.
Yeah. So I will put those here anyway. Okay, so if people want to introduce themselves, I'll just call on, I'll just call on you, so that'll be easier. Your name, pronouns, and maybe if you want to share one reason why you're here today, that's great. Or any other fact about you, whatever you want to. So I'll start since I'm talking already anyway. I'm Steve Nathan, Rabbi, Director of Jewish Student Life, and Associate Chaplain at Lehigh University. I can't remember if I said my pronouns, but they're on my screen, he, him, his. And also, I do lead services and teach periodically, monthly, at Am Haskalah. And I'm here because I'm a teacher. So, Jane, since you're unmuted already.
Okay. Jane Levine. I'm just a fairly long-term member of Am Haskalah, and love the continuing ed things. They're just really great.
Okay, great. Wilma? Actually, no, I should say, since we're being you need to, but in solidarity with Jill Biden, Dr. Brucker.
Okay, I am a long-term member of Am Haskalah. I like going to continuing education classes, and that's why I am here. And I can thank Joy, because I did not realize we had this today. And I spoke to her this morning, checking on how she was doing. And she said, oh, she's really not up to coming because she had the surgery and doesn't quite feel well. She had gum surgery.
Oh, okay.
And so I said, oh, thank you, I'll go. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, great.
And I'm eating lunch, so I'm gonna close me out here.
Yeah. Let's see, Paula.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paula, member of Am Haskalah. I enjoy the learning and the community. Thank you.
Great. Julian?
Hi, I'm Julian Weiss, as you probably know. I'm a member of Sukkot Shalom. You know, it's he, him. You know, we're from Columbus. We're, visiting. And I came here because I love the Tanakh and the Talmud and, gaining lessons for my life and keeping alive the culture of my, ancestors. And I'd like to know more about, Reconstructionist Judaism and how we came to where we are.
Cool, thanks, welcome. Crystal, well, there's three of you there.
Hi, yeah, we're here through the Sukkot Shalom community in Columbus. And we would like to learn more, and we're excited to see that you're leading the talk today. And hope to hear what you have to say.
And all of your names?
Hi, I'm Crystal, and I was really attracted to the title of the talk. And this is Elias.
Okay, and then wait, I still don't know that your name.
What'd you say, Eric?
Eric, yeah.
Okay, great.
Me too.
All right, Janny?
I've been a member for maybe 8 years. I'm not sure really how long. And I like the egalitarianism of Reconstructionist philosophy, and I attend the adult ed because there's so much to learn and I want to learn more. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Rachel? Oh, wait, is it Dr. Zane, right?
No,
No, you're not a doctor. I don't know why I thought you were a doctor too.
no.
Okay.
I have a master's degree in education, but not a
Okay.
doctor.
I was gonna say Master Zane, but that doesn't work.
No, not at all. My name is Rachel Zane. I'm she, her pronouns. I have been a member of Am Haskalah since my kids were 13. And I taught at Am Haskalah before that. Actually, I guess they were 11. Third grade. What a year. I enjoy Reconstructionism because of what Danny said, the egalitarianism and the choice, and that it's participatory, especially in our congregation, because we do a lot of lay-led stuff. Yeah, I guess that's about it. I'm one of the people that leads a lot of services. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Betsy?
Hi, I'm Betsy. She, her. And I just, I enjoy the topic of God. Grew up feeling like an atheist, and it's funny. I don't know. I have so many funny stories around that, but ended up shocking my Christian. Well, went to the Christian summer camp for girls at the end of the Y, and when I was a kid, and they had never had a Jewish person, and so at first they like reprimanded me for not joining in on the prayers. And then when they found out I was Jewish, they would have everybody pray, and then it would be, and Betsy. So I ended up leading the prayers for the minority Jewish component there. At this point, I have a working God image that works for me. I've found some rabbis that have that same image, others don't. And I guess that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. Liz?
I'm Liz, she, her, and I've been around for about 8-9 years now, and I am the administrator for Am Haskalah. So if anybody needs any more information, wants to sign up for emails, yada, yada, I'm the one to harass. And I'm here because I love all these classes, and I'm always intrigued about the Reconstructionist view of things. So I love that we're doing the deep dive this year.
Okay, great. And Anonymous? Who is Anonymous?
Hi, it's Tamar Ernest.
Oh, yay!
Hey, Tamar. How are you? I haven't seen you in a long time.
Hello, everybody. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. You too.
Nice to see you, or like, see your shape.
And you are Dr. Ernest.
Yep. That's me. In whatever form you want me.
Okay.
So we're talking about views about who or whatever is running the universe, huh?
Yeah.
Maybe. Running
Okay.
it depends how you look at it, but we'll.
Yeah. I'm sorry I was a little late.
Okay.
When I was 7, I was living in Israel. It was just before and after the state was declared. We got there in December of 1947. And I'm 8 years old, living in Haifa and playing out on on Mount Carmel. We lived, the apartment we had was near there. And one day I'm walking around, no adults around, And I feel this presence, and it's very comfortable. And I hear in my head, I want you to know you'll never be alone. And it's a very reassuring voice. First experience with the spiritual experience. Years later, I've had many interesting messages. One year it was in September, and I woke up about 4:30 in the morning, and this little voice in my head is saying very clearly, "You're going to medical school." What? You're going to medical school. Oh, go away. You're in the wrong bedroom. I lay down. I try to go back to sleep. There I am sitting way up in bed. Same voice, same message. By the third time, it was getting a little louder. And I said, all right, I hear you. And it turned out that I had 3 weeks to apply for and take the medical college admissions tests. I had never thought about going to medical school. I was in nursing school at Penn at that time. So I finally, all of the words for me about this celestial being somehow are inadequate. They lock me into one idea or another idea, and that's why I've come to call it who or whatever is running the universe. And the third story is when I was in high school in chemistry class, sitting in front of a full wall of the chemical elements. And the teacher had told us that there were 92 naturally occurring elements. And I looked at that for many, many days and weeks. And one day I said to myself, 92 naturally occurring elements. If everything in the universe is made of these, there's got to be a puzzle maker somewhere. And then my little voice in my head said, well, who do you pray to? And I've been looking at that answer for a long time. Thank you. And happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Really an amazing story.
Yeah.
I think one thing, I want to go on a tangent here. One thing I like about Judaism as opposed to some of the other religions, it has a bit of an orthodox view of God, at least to me. I think there is many ideas about it, like as there are Jews. I mean, I think for me personally, God, I tend to view God as something it's omnipotent, it's all there, but at the same time, it's almost like you can interact with it. And, in the same way that, at Lot, Abraham was like, hey, don't blow up the whole city yet, and ultimately God relented. It can be wrong in the same way. It's almost human which is, I guess, a very human thing to be. And at the same time, it also has, it has like your story tomorrow, it can have a voice and it has this omnipotence to it, I just felt it.
Thanks, Julian. So it's interesting, tomorrow when you were talking about that voice, that same voice told me I should go to rabbinical school, and I had the same reaction as you did when it told you to go to medical school. I was like, what, are you crazy? I was 25, 26 at the time, I can't remember. But eventually, obviously I listened to it. So, is that voice a supernatural God talking to us? Is it something within us that we call God, the divine? Is it something that rules the universe? Is it, there? Yes, no, everything. As Julian was saying, there are so many different ideas of God within Judaism. And some people within Judaism, especially on the more traditional end of things, will tell you that, this is right, this is wrong. But really Jewish tradition doesn't, until it was influenced by, especially the Christian world, didn't really, and then somewhat the Muslim world, but definitely the Christian world didn't really talk about what God is. We never had an organized, systematic theology about God. the way that Christianity does and other religions do. The way we find God is by the stories, or the texts, I should say, because stories makes it seem a little less important. But the narratives. So first, we have the ideas in the Bible where we know that, we're going to spend most of our time looking at Reconstructionist ideas of God, but I feel like we have to look at a little bit at where things started. So looking at the Torah and the Bible in general, again, the Bible being the Torah, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and then the Ketuvim, the writings like Psalms and Job and Esther and all of those things. When we're looking at the Hebrew scriptures, the Tanakh, how do you how do you feel God is portrayed? What is God? What does God do? You can just unmute yourself or put it on the chat. I know that if you're on the phone, it's harder to do it on the chat. What are some things you think of when you think of God in the Bible, in the Torah?
It's Tamara again. There's a wonderful book called God, a Biography.
Yes. I read it years ago.
I think Mills was the author.
Yeah. I love that. And so but does anybody have, what does God do? God is a protector, Jenny says.
Provider.
What's the first thing God is in the Torah? What's the very first thing that God does? Liz?
Like omnipotence and.
But what is the first thing that God does in the Torah?
Creator.
Creator, right. So God creates.
The celestial artist.
Celestial artist. Okay.
Yeah.
Julian, celestial mirror. Definitely. I would say that comes sort of a later image, but it's definitely in one of the texts we're looking at, we talk about God as a mirror. But the first thing that God does, the first thing we know about God is God creates. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, it depends how you want to translate it, God created the heavens and the earth. So that's, so we have God creating human beings, God creating all of the universe, and then, God from then on sort of controls history, and I'm putting that in air quotes because at least the way I look at it, the Bible is not history or science. The Bible is a book, is a spiritual, religious, theological text, even though there was no actual systematic theology. I don't necessarily look at it. It's religious mythology, the way I look at it. It's not literally a historical text. If you look at it that way, that's perfectly fine. So, we have I'll use the word history of God. We have all of the people that God chooses and the way God reveals God's self. And we have, what are any other images in the Torah that you think of in terms of God?
A guide.
God is a guide. Okay. God helps guide various people. Is the Bible a book of revelations? Well, I would say book of Revelations, not with a capital R, Jenny, because the book of Revelations with a capital R is the final book of, just to clarify, is the final book of the Christian scriptures, which is interesting because I'm working with someone for conversion right now, and she was asking me about Revelation in Judaism. Is it the same as the book of Revelations? And I, very clearly it's not. But so God reveals, what does God reveal to us according to tradition? It's on a mountain.
The Ten Commandments.
The Ten Commandments, or in the rabbinic telling, it becomes the Torah.
The Torah.
Right. So God creates the world, God reveals Torah. And then the third thing that God does actually is before God reveals. These are the three major images of God within Jewish tradition: God, creator, revealer, But before God reveals, how does God get the people to Mount Sinai?
Freedom from slavery.
Freedom from slavery. So
I
creation.
took you out of Egypt.
Right. So creation, redemption, and revelation are the three key ways of looking at God in Jewish tradition. It's interesting. You find the often 6 points of a star. You'll get, especially Franz Rosenzweig talked about this. The three of the points are creation, revelation, redemption, and then we've got God, Torah, and Israel as the other three. So, so those are the three images of God in the Torah and in the Bible, in the Tanakh. And then, we get more image, but we still don't know a lot about God. We see what God does. Some of it we might like, some of it we might not like, especially some of the punishment stuff. But those are really the major, and we see God as a parental figure, other things as well. And we see a very intimate relationship between God and human beings, especially we see that with definitely with Abraham, but it really reaches the pinnacle with Moses, where God talks to Moses, Moses talks to God. As Maimonides said, years later, which was then put in the Piyut, the religious poem Yigdal, Moses was the only one who spoke to God face to face. Of course, again, metaphor. God doesn't have a face. But that intimate relationship. So we do see the relational piece of God, and we see the supernatural part of God. We see God acting in supernatural ways. Again, when we're talking about supernatural, we're not talking about ghosts and goblins and vampires. We're talking about beyond nature. So when God splits the sea, that's a supernatural act. When God gives them the Ten Commandments, the Torah on Mount Sinai, that's a supernatural act. When we look at, of course, when we look at some of Mordechai Kaplan's writings, we'll see Mordechai Kaplan was not particularly fond of those images, and actually removed them from the original Reconstructionist prayer book. So we get that, and then in the later rabbinic text, and especially in the Midrash, which is stories, we find stories about how God interacts with people. And somebody, I think it may have been Julian, who was somebody sort of intimated at often the way that God is portrayed, and this is that sometimes it's very human, and you see that in the Torah, where God is jealous. God complains to Moses, why did I ever free these people? I should have just left them where they were. And the rabbis continue that even more. So I often say that it's not so much that human beings are created in the image of God, but especially in rabbinic literature, God is created in the image of human beings. Some people might find that heretical. I don't, because I think that's what the rabbis were doing. They were trying to help us understand human nature by ascribing to God very human attributes. So, jump ahead. Again, we've never had, until Maimonides in I'm so bad at chronology, 12th century.
I think so.
I think so, 12th, yes. Either 12th or 14th, I always forget. It's an even number. In Spain and Egypt and Palestine at the time. He was one of the first people to really lay out any kind of systematic theology belief in God, again in Yigdal. And it's a very supernatural image of God. It later becomes Yigdal, the Piyut, the poem. But he talks about God Moses talking to God face to face. There's no God like God. God is super, and it's very supernatural imagery. But before then, there was not a lot of anybody really stating it. It was all through the Midrash and stories. But even though there was no right or wrong belief in God, and it wasn't like within Christianity where you had to accept Jesus as your savior. You didn't have to accept God as your savior. You didn't have to accept God as anything. If you're Jewish, you're Jewish. If you're born Jewish, or if you convert to Judaism, you are Jewish. And it doesn't, there's never or there shouldn't be a litmus test of what you believe per se. Conversations about it, sure, but no litmus test. And the truth is, you can be an atheist and be Jewish. You're not gonna, Christian friends of mine, especially Christian clergy, sort of sometimes they're, aghast. Wait, you can say you don't believe in God and you're not kicked out? Like, no. Some communities might kick you out, but you're still Jewish. And so that's really important, that we don't have, there is no proclamation of faith. The closest thing we have to it in the Torah maybe is Shema, the acknowledgement of one God. But what that God is, who that God is never really stated. So jumping ahead through centuries of writings on God, and then developing theology and philosophy and all of that, again, especially in response to Christianity, we finally get to the 20th century. We skipped over a lot there, but because we want to look at Reconstructionism. We want to look at Reconstructionist beliefs about God, and I'm making clear to put, to say beliefs, not belief about God. Because even though there are some beliefs about God that Mordechai Kaplan might have looked at you like, what, are you crazy? He would never have said you have to believe his way, even though he thought it was right. So, Mordechai Kaplan, I know last time, I assume, Armin went into some of the origins of Reconstructionism, but, he started writing in the 30s. He was a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, the conservative movement in early 1900s. Like I said, I'm terrible at chronology. But 1936, he wrote Judaism as a Civilization, which sort of mapped out his belief about Judaism and what he thought Judaism was. And he was coming from the Orthodox world. He grew up in the Orthodox world, went to the conservative seminary because the Orthodox world didn't quite speak to him, but then created Reconstructionism, which he saw as a philosophy that would hopefully permeate all of Judaism. He never expected to create an actual movement. That never happened until 1968, really, when the college was created. So what is God according to Kaplan is the question here. So as I said earlier, he writes, sometimes it's very dense and it's very academic at times, but it's also, that's not necessarily problematic, but just sometimes it takes a little while to parse through his words. So we're gonna start, all right, 1 second, let me get the share screen here. Okay, everybody got that? Who's on here? Who's not on the phone? And we'll make sure to read all the text so those who are on the phone will hear it. The first is actually not his earliest text. This is Future of the American Jew, which is a little bit later. But he talks about the idea between the difference between belief and conception. And really what he talks about, and I'm just gonna sort of paraphrase this. I realized when for those who can see this, I highlighted a lot of key verses and often lines, and often what happens when I highlight, it's like I end up highlighting the whole thing. It's like, why did I even bother highlighting it? But that's just my little thing. So, he talks about the belief in God and the conception, the belief in God being the experience of some kind of a cosmic power that we depend on for our existence. And then the conception of God is how we understand intellectually that cosmic power. So, so again, we believe in God, but then the conception is, again, is God omnipotent? Is this, is that? And that's, we're focusing a lot more on the conception of God, because he's not as concerned about, do you believe in God or what do you believe? It's how do you conceive of this greater power? So the God idea is first expressed in Judaism as civilization. 1936. And would somebody like to read the God idea, text A there?
Nothing about the Jewish civilization of the past is so conspicuous as its permeation with the God idea. The Jewish civilization cannot survive without the God idea as an integral part, but it is in no need of having any specific formulation of that idea authoritative for all Jews. As long as we are struggling to express the same fundamental fact about the cosmos that our ancestors designated for the term God, namely the fact that its momentousness or holiness, and are endeavoring to achieve the ideals of human life which derive from that, we have a right to retain the term God.
If he said nothing else besides this, you know, it's sort of like Dayenu. That would have been enough in a way. What is he saying here? How do you understand this text? Anybody just unmute yourself. What is he saying? And also, what word does he never use in here?
I don't see the word believe.
Right. Never uses the word belief. But what else is he saying about the God idea? 2 points. One is that, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that no need of having any specific formulation of that idea.
Right. So you don't have to have a specific formulation, but even before that, in the first highlighted line, you know, even in spite of that, the idea of God is central to Judaism. What that idea is for each individual person, yeah, that's up to us. And, you know, when he defines Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people, the core of that religious civilization is, in part, the God idea. That, in some ways, is what connects the people. Let's see. Wait, let me. Sorry. Oh, I forget. And then again, I apologize for. I don't know. I should have egalitarianized the English, non-gendered the English, and I did this a long time ago. And it was in a PDF. So the word God has come to be symbolically expressive of the highest ideals for which human beings strive. So what is that, parsing that? What is God? Is God a being? No, God is a symbol that somehow expresses our highest ideal. What does that mean? Anybody want to take a stab at what that means for them? That God has come to be symbolically expressive of the highest ideals for which we strive.
It's Tamar. In the oh dear. Anyway, I think it's Psalm 145. It talks about many different aspects of God, but one of them is that God gives nourishment to everything, everyone. And when we say that, we open our hand, Poteach et yadecha, and that's one way of becoming symbolically, you know, this relationship. One example of the concept.
Okay, right. That idea that God opens up the hand to the needy, and gives us all what we need. Again, you can look at that literally, you can look at it metaphorically, but somehow what we need as individuals and as a universe is expressed by our notion of divinity. So in the theological world, especially in the Christian theological world, we have a lot of conversation about God being natural versus supernatural. Is God there are people, and then there are people who are, again, pre-Christian world. We have people who are pantheists, and then we have panentheists, which means sort of God is inside of everything, but God isn't everything in the way that a more idolatrous way of looking at it is. But Kaplan uses the term, and I think he actually coined this phrase, transnaturalism. So again, naturalism is that God is everywhere in nature. Okay, but transnaturalism is a little bit different. So somebody want to read that? The next, sorry, I got all mixed up with my lettering of these texts, evidently. So the transnaturalism, so section 4, letter A. Somebody want to read that? And while you're reading it, I will be back in 2 seconds.
Transnaturalism is the extension of naturalism, which takes into account much that mechanistic or materialistic or positivist science is incapable of dealing with. Transnaturalism reaches out into the domain where mind, personality, purpose, ideals, values, and meanings dwell. Transnaturalist religion beholds God in the fulfillment of human nature and not in the suspension of the natural order. What does suspension of the natural order mean? Okay.
I'm back. Sorry. So what is transnaturalism? Who wants to put it in a more, who wants to say in their terms, what is transnaturalism? Well, first of all, what isn't it?
It's not the concrete.
It's not concrete. Okay. And it's also not supernatural. It's not the suspension of the natural order. It's something that it reaches out into the domain where the mind, personality, purpose, ideals, values, and meanings dwell. It somehow connects everything together, but it's in a it's a force that in the universe. I always say that in some ways Star Wars is very Reconstructionist. The images, the images of, I'm not the first one to say this, the images of what the force is in Star Wars, for those who have seen the Star Wars movie, is very similar to Kaplan's idea of transnaturalism. Let's continue with text B though, because this is something that continues on in his writings. Who wants to read text B right here?
I can.
Okay.
Belief in God is belief in the existence of a power conducive to salvation, which is the fulfillment of human destiny. The biological will to live implies the existence of conditions that are propitious to life. The will to live abundantly and to achieve one's destiny likewise implies the existence of conditions that favor abundant life or salvation. The taking for granted that such conditions exist is the basis of religious conception of God, a power predisposing man to his ultimate good, salvation, or self-fulfillment.
Okay, so God is the sort of shorthand of this is God is the power that makes for salvation. Again, but he defines salvation very differently than Christianity defines salvation. Salvation being otherworldly, being at the end of times, the end of days.
Ask Maria to have her and Richard come over.
What? Wait. Okay, there we go.
Is salvation in Kaplan's conception being the best that we can possibly be? More so than end of days kind of thing?
Yes.
Then?
Salvation is the fulfillment of human destiny. It's us striving for, it's when we reach that goal that we have for ourselves to be the best human beings that we can be. When we bring goodness into the world, and when we act in the best possible ways as individual human beings, that's really what salvation is for Kaplan. It's not anything otherworldly or supernatural or anything like that. the image, the image that we have in traditional Judaism for the salvation is the Exodus from Egypt and the splitting of the Red Sea. He doesn't focus so much on the splitting of the Red Sea because he doesn't like the supernatural aspect of that. But the idea of freedom from slavery in order to fulfill, we're not freed from slavery in order to just go out and do whatever we want. We're freed from slavery in order to then, in traditional terms, do God's will, serve God. In his terminology, he would say, we're freed from slavery in order to then be free to do what we need to in order to make the world the best place possible. So it's a very different idea of God, and yet it isn't. Because there is a piece of that, the idea that God, obviously God is there to help us become the best people that we can be. But in the more traditional sense, God has the ability to make things happen in order for that to happen. And, when you look at, thinking of Tamar's story or even my story to a certain extent, I see it, I'll talk about myself, I see that as God leading me down the path to becoming a rabbi, but I don't see it as a supernatural. I see it as something that is within me. And it's really harder to explain a transnatural idea or a non-supernatural idea of God. It's much easier to say, well, I think God made me do this, or God told me to do this, literally. But it's something more nebulous than that.
God is the conception which kind of lets that thought in the back of your head be at the forefront.
That's a great way to put it, Julian. Thank you.
Great way of thinking about things.
Yeah, I really like that.
Thank you.
Is this still being recorded? I just don't see the recording thing on my screen.
Still streaming to YouTube to record.
Okay, good. Oh, there we go. I see it now. I missed it. I have two screens going, so it's on the other screen. So here's oops, sorry. C also says a little bit more that we suggest that God be thought of as the cosmic process that makes for a human being's life abundant. Sometimes it's, again, somewhat archaic way of stating things, or salvation. As cosmic process, God is more than physical, chemical, biological, psychological, or even social process. God includes them all. But what is distinctive about the God process is that it is superfactual. Again, sometimes it's like, really using you. Okay, it's superfactual, which always makes you think of Mary Poppins for some reason, and super experiential. But, and this is really essential for him, were one to add the term supernatural, the whole point of this approach would be missed, since that term implies miracle or suspension of natural law. On the other hand, it would be correct to say that the God process is transnatural. So to say God is supernatural, it takes things away from us in a way, because we're the ones who have to experience God, and we're the ones who have to figure out what it means to be godly and how to manifest all of these things in the world. So it's super factual and super experiential. So it's somehow beyond our understanding. It's beyond our experience. It's beyond just, the facts in a book, but it's not beyond nature. So in that way, there's still, it's more about us experiencing it and it working through us, as opposed to it working on us. We're not pieces on a chessboard.
It's like having free will. That's part of the
right.
process.
Right. And, within Judaism, there's always been that tension between, God gives us free will, and yet everything is predetermined. That is, in the rabbinic literature, I'm trying to remember exactly where it is. Yes.
So how are these ideas, are they talked about in the more Orthodox movement at all? Do you know?
Are they talked about within Orthodoxy? Well, it's into. I don't know, because I don't spend a lot of time in that world, but it depends. I mean, I don't want to answer that because I know that there are a lot of different beliefs within Orthodoxy on what is the nature of God. Because even when you look at traditional authors, I mean, Maimonides and some of the philosophers in the Middle Ages did not believe that God watched over everything in the universe and made everything happen. But it's not quite the same thing. So I don't know how much this gets talked about, and to be honest. One of my least favorite things and yet most important things to say as a rabbi is, I don't know the answer to that one. But it's worth looking into. But also, as it says, thinking of God as process, because some people will say that idea of thinking of God as process and not as a supernatural being, somehow diminishes God. And he says, thinking of God as process rather than entity in no way tends to make God less real. The soul process too is superfactual, super experiential, and transnatural. So the soul process, somehow what the soul, our inner self, the divine self within us, is also beyond somewhat beyond understanding and connects us with the God process. The analogy that I like to use, which in terms of, or the image I like to use in terms of God, and I found I don't think it was Kaplan, I think it was Ira Eisenstein, may he rest in peace, Kaplan's son-in-law, who really took over the mantle from Kaplan, used a similar analogy, I believe, or metaphor. I think of an electrical current. So, if you're in a house, you have power in the house. You have an electrical current running through the house. You have all these electrical appliances. But if you don't plug the appliances into the power source, they're just going to sit there and do nothing. So in some ways, we're actually like to use lamp because it's a nicer image than thinking of a blender or a food processor. So we're the lamp. Okay, we have the ability to shine into the world. We have the ability to bring goodness into the world. We have to plug ourselves into that power source, which we call God, or some of us call God, not everybody does. And that's what gives us the ability to shine the light, to make the world a better place. Now, then you get into the debate about, well, what about people who are atheists and do good things? I think they're plugging into some sort of power source in the universe. They might just call it the universe or something else. I choose to call it God. But, it's funny. I remember a colleague of mine who just recently died young, Rabbi Michael Micklin, alav shalom, in Hazleton. He was very openly an atheist, and would talk about his atheism, and would often say, when people would use more traditional God language, do you really believe that stuff? And I remember once at a lecture with Arthur Green in Philadelphia at the Rabbinical Convention, he was talking about, God giving the Torah at Sinai, or the splitting of the Red Sea, one of the supernatural miracles in the Torah. And somebody said, how could you use that language? You really believe that happened? And his response was, really doesn't matter. Is it fact or is it metaphor? What matters is the meaning behind it. What matters is the truth behind it, not whether or not it is factual or historical. So using this language as purely as metaphor, even if you don't really believe in God, if it gets you to the same place, whether you choose to call it God or not, doesn't really matter, in my opinion. Somebody wants to read that the paragraph that I didn't number. This begins with Reconstructionist Judaism is religious naturalism, the third one down on the right. Who wants to read that?
Reconstructionist Judaism is religious naturalism. God, to our way of thinking, is not a person who stands over against the universe he has created. The term God is rather the name we give to the interpersonal process of growth and creativity which takes place naturally among men and women striving for authentic fulfillment. Reconstructionism, in short, preaches godliness rather than God.
So this is Alan Miller, who took over as rabbi of the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, which was Kaplan's congregation. And he takes Kaplan's and makes it much more user-friendly, the wording of it. Because it's really what we just read. But it's that interpersonal process, and it's godliness rather than God. And that's something we're going to get to in a little bit when we look at Harold Schulweis, who was one of Kaplan's disciples in the conservative movement. And it's funny because, you know, again, obviously the Reconstructionist movement was created, and we have a lot of wonderful writers and thinkers within the conservative Reconstructionist movement. But in the early days, especially, the two strongest proponents of Kaplan's theology were probably Harold Schulweis and Harold Kushner, who were both very prominent conservative rabbis. But as I said, Kaplan taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary for 60 years, actually. And he and Heschel were probably the two greatest influences on rabbinical students during their years there, and they had radically different ideas of God. And at the end of our continuing ed course this year, I'll have 2 more sessions on Heschel, which were supposed to happen last year, but didn't because something happened in the spring that made it difficult for me to go to work and get my Heschel books. I don't remember what it was, though. Anyway, so, you know, I'm going to skip that text. Because, well, what he's talking about in the next text is that there are two different names for God in the Torah, Elohim and Yud-He Vav-He, which we would pronounce as Adonai. That is the tetragrammaton, the unknowable name of God. So, which then gets transliterated in Christian scriptures, especially into Yahweh. So, you know, he talks about that Elohim, and the rabbis talk about what's the difference between the two. They don't deal with the fact that there were actually 2 different authors of the Torah, which is one reason why the 2 different terms are used, because the rabbis didn't believe that there were different authors to the Torah. They use one is judgment and one is mercy, but another way of looking at it, which Kaplan espouses, is that Elohim is the God of the cosmos, and Yud-He Vav-He represents the power, so which is sort of the creation and all of that. Yud-He Vav-He is the power of salvation. Where'd it go? Sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction here. Yud-He Vav-He represents the power of salvation, which the collective self-consciousness generates, and which is akin to that which makes the cosmos of nature or nature as whole possible. Yud-He Vav-He is our God of Israel, and God is none other than the collective consciousness of the Jewish people. So Elohim, the Kitzur, the nutshell version of that, is Elohim is God of the cosmos, is the more universal God. Yud-He Vav-He is our conception, the Jewish conception of God, that sort of intersects with the more universal perception of conception of God. And it's our collective consciousness as a Jewish people, which is very much, you know, makes me think of the collective unconscious, which is a Jungian phrase. And I don't know how much I'm assuming he read Jung. But when Jung was Jung? Early 20th century, right? So this idea that there's a universal collective consciousness and there's a Jewish collective consciousness, and Yud-He Vav-He, which we call Adonai, is the Jewish collective consciousness, which connects us to that bigger sense. And as it says here, I'll read this one again and then I'll let other people read. Jews will conceive, again, because this is essential, Jews will conceive of God in different ways. The differences in their ways of thinking about God will not impair the essential unity of Jewish religion, as long as Jews serve God by endeavoring to hallow Jewish life. So he's still using that originally supernatural language of serving God, because if you're serving God, then there is a being out there. There is a supernatural being that you are serving, traditionally speaking. But what he's saying is that in some way, endeavoring to hallow Jewish life, endeavoring to make the world holy, endeavoring to make our life holy. That's how we serve God. And he uses that as a metaphor, not as some kind of a fact. And again, saying that how we conceive of God doesn't matter. There are all these different ways. And even when I know that he and Heschel would get into arguments about their God conceptions, because Heschel came out of the Hasidic world and it was a much more mystical way of thinking, and believing that we had a relationship with some kind of divine being that could make things happen, etc. You know, they would argue, but they respected each other because they believed that they understood that neither this nor this is correct, or that was just sort of a paraphrase of the traditional rabbinic text, which is when the rabbis are gathered around the table arguing about something, and they have two differing opinions, and basically what Yehuda Nasi, the head of the rabbinic court, then said basically, you know, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim. Both these and these are the words of the living God, even though they totally contradict each other. And you'll find that in the Talmud. So even if you have, as long as you are, they would say, you know, as long as you are trying to do God's will, as long as you are trying to be godly in the world, to make the world better, these and these are both godly. Instead of saying these and these are both the words of the living God, these ways are both how we experience or manifest godliness in the world.
You just reminded me of the concept of Yisrael, a God wrestler.
Yes.
We struggle to find an understanding. And as I think, certainly as I've grown up and matured, and now I'm senioring, the ideas change or they deepen. And yeah, part of wrestling.
Yep, exactly. Because when Jacob gets the name Yisrael, it's not about, you know, it could have been some phrase like, you know, God, Jacob knew God or understood God, but no, Jacob wrestled with God. Doesn't, you know, and prevailed in that. He prevailed in that he got out of it alive. So yeah, we're always wrestling with God in some way. So as I mentioned before, post-Kaplanian theology, or Kaplanian theology is expressed post-Kaplan. Harold Schulweis' predicate theology I find very helpful. And again, the predicate being the part of the sentence that carries the verb.
When did post-Kaplan theology begin?
That's a good question. So I think, let me see. Okay, so I was going to say 70s. Yeah, so really in the 70s, he was still alive. He died in 82 at the age of 103, or 83 at the age of 102, one or the other.
Oh, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So he was still alive, but it was his students that sort of took his, you know, his writings and again expressed them differently, brought them to a new level. So I would say, you know, it especially started, maybe it started in the 60s, but definitely the 70s. And then, you know, in the popular consciousness, when Harold Kushner wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People, which was in the 80s, that was, people didn't realize it. I mean, that was a huge bestseller. It may still be, I don't know. But that was really a very clear explanation or extension of Kaplanian theology. So the first, all right, so who would like to read under Harold Schulweis' predicate theology, letter A, that first paragraph? Somebody who hasn't read yet, maybe?
I can read, okay. He locates God not above, but within and between human beings, not a vertical relationship, but communal and internal. The conception of the God within and between allows him to argue that revelation is both divine in origin and carried out by human powers of expression. Morality is the expression of conscience, which is a living nexus between the divine and the human in everyday life. Schulweis thought that by defining God as the source of history's dynamic, the conception of the personal God reduces the human being to passivity and subservience. Instead, Schulweis argues for a two-dimensional conception: Elohim, the amoral God of nature; Adonai, the God of transformation, whose attributes of goodness, godliness, we make real in bringing the world closer to perfection. Thus, the focus of religious experience and reflection for Schulweis is not God, but godliness. This predicate theology concentrates upon God's attributes of goodness instead of arguing the existence of a personal subject God. In this way, Schulweis rescues belief from the problem of evil and simultaneously restores the dignified place of a human being as God's covenantal partner.
Yeah, covenantal partner. Okay.
Covenantal partner.
That's a tricky one. So again, so he's somehow seeing God as there is this power in the universe. There is this sort of divine revelation, but what does that mean? Somehow God is revealed to us, but it's our expression, and it's we have. What it comes down to basically is there is this again, we sort of read this a little bit before. We have this idea of a universal God, some sort of force throughout the universe, and yet as he said, and I implied earlier, a supernatural God sort of absolves us of any responsibility because God is doing it for us. Some people would argue with that. Some people who are more traditional theologically would argue with that. But what he said, so there's God, and God is the power for transformation, the power for salvation, to use Kaplan's terms. But what's really important is godliness. How do we manifest what we see as godly in the world? So in other words, it's not that goodness is God, but God is goodliness. And that works through us. And again, it's sort of, and Kaplan, and I think Schulweis as well, as it says here, in some ways it does rescue us from the problem of evil, because that really puts also evil as the responsibility of human beings. And he says, he knows that despite the overwhelming evil of the Holocaust, there also still remain sparks of Adonai, which I would say is godliness within human beings, even, other human beings. And he was the one who actually founded the Foundation for the Righteous Gentiles, to help show that, even in a world where there was evil, there were sparks of divinity, or there was godliness within other human beings, within Christians in Europe who tried to save us. So this makes it a little more clear. Sorry for the numbering here, the lettering. The A, C-A, on the next page, the Elohut, or godliness. This explains it a little more directly than I think the other text. Somebody want to read that?
Elohut, or godliness, refers to the way the predicates a tradition discovers, accepts, and names as divinity are related. Elohut, like the term university, has a unitive function. Elohut, godliness, is one in that it unites and relates the godly attributes, such as intelligence, compassion, justice, peace, which are named divine when they serve ends which the community of faith judges to be good.
So again, that's sort of, again, that's the in some ways the Star Wars idea that somehow godliness connects all of these godly attributes, intelligence, compassion, justice, and peace, etc., that enable us to make the world a better place, and enable us to improve ourselves and to improve other people and to improve the world. That's really those are the predicates. Those are the verbal phrases that are. Sorry, I can't talk straight.
God is in the good.
Yeah, like you said, God heals the sick versus healing the sick is godly. So which is interesting because when we say the Mishaberach, where we're praying to God to heal the sick, whenever I give the introduction to that, I always say something along the lines of, to grant those who are in need of healing sense of caring and say it every week. I should know what I say. Wholeness that comes from the divine, and also to grant those who are caregivers and those who are in the healing professions that ability to bring healing, wholeness, care, and compassion to all those in need, which is also divine. And again, it's not divine in that God is saying, okay, I'm going to give this person the ability to give healing, but it's that force in the universe, again, that when we tap into it, gives us the ability to bring healing. Obviously, the reality of that is also that sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes healing doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen the way that we expect it to. Because remember, when we pray for healing, it's refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf. It's healing of the spirit, healing of the soul, and healing of the body. So sometimes it's the healing of the soul and not the healing of the body. Sometimes it's both. So it's, again, it's using that force in the universe to help us bring healing into the world, to bring goodliness into the world, to bring godliness into the world. Any thoughts or questions? Because we have one more text, which is Harold Kushner. And he's the one who brings in the idea of the mirror that I think was it Jani that brought up, Julian, who brought up the idea of a celestial mirror. Just a little introduction to Harold Schulweis. How many people here have read When Bad Things Happen to Good People? If you haven't, you should. It was very powerful for me and also helped me. I didn't realize I was reading Reconstructionist beliefs when I first read it. It was before I started rabbinical school. So Kushner had a child with progeria, which is the disease where you age very rapidly. And I can't remember if it was a son or daughter died by the time they were a teenager. And he was questioning God. How could this happen? And he heard people come and say to him, oh, this is part of God's plan. God has a better plan for him. He's in a better place. All of these things, which they were well-meaning, but none of that helped him.
That's kind of, it can be hurtful because that's not, it's, saying that there's a good, you're suffering at the moment. That seems kind of.
Exactly. And my feeling with that is I always, when I'm dealing with people who are in grief, I need to see where they are. If they're expressing that belief that, if it brings them comfort to believe that God has, that if this was part of God's plan, that they're in a better place now, then then I'm not the one to say to them, well, gee, I don't believe in that. But I would never say that to someone unless I know that is their belief. Actually, I still wouldn't say it to someone because it's not my belief, but I would certainly let them have that belief. So he was exploring this and he was questioning God, and he looked at the book of Job. In the book of Job, God tests Job at the urge of Satan, Satan, who is not the source of evil, but the adversary, which in a few places sort of eggs God on. And Satan says to God, "Oh, Job isn't really that pious, that righteous. You think he's so great. He really isn't. If you give him enough bad stuff, he'll stop believing in you." So, his wife dies, his kids die, he loses everything. I still remember my theology professor at Boston College describing Job as sitting on a dung heap, scratching his boils with a hoe. And that's kind of where Job is. But he does it. He questions God. He rails against God, but he never gives up his belief in God. And what Kushner says is there are three different beliefs, and you can't hold on to all three of them. In his worldview, you can't hold on to all three of them. You have to let go of one of them. One is that God is good, or that goodness is godly. One is that Job is good, and the third is that God is omnipotent. God is all powerful. And of those three, in the way he looks at it, the only way to make the story of Job work, or the only way for him to come to terms with his own suffering, is to give up the belief that God is all powerful. God may be omniscient, whatever that means. God is all knowing, or God is somehow connected to everything. But the idea that God is all powerful, to him, he basically says, if God is all powerful, why did he allow this to happen? And he used the word he. Why did God allow this to happen? Why did God allow the Holocaust to happen? If God is all powerful, I can't believe that God is all powerful. And this comes straight out of Kaplanian theology.
Funny, that's kind of why I'm attracted to Reconstructionism too. I didn't even know that he said that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The number of people who feel that way within the Jewish world is outside of the Orthodox world, or even within, but certainly without the Orthodox world is pretty large, the percentage of people who believe that way. And, I've found through the years that anytime I describe Reconstructionism and talk about this to Reconstructionism in this way to people who are maybe, see themselves as reform or conservative or nothing, whatever, they're like, oh, I believe that way. I guess I'm a Reconstructionist. So, which in part is, you can credit Kaplan for that to a certain extent, because not only did he train conservative rabbis for 60 years, but he is one of the most often taught writers, theologians, even in the other movements. I remember one time being at a conference at the Reform Seminary at HUC in New York, and they were talking about God, and they said, as my professor so-and-so said, some professor in the Reform movement, the past has a vote, but not a veto. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, you need to get your sources correct. That was Mordechai Kaplan. That was one of his prime catchphrases in Judaism as a civilization. It was, God is the power that makes for salvation, and the past has a vote, but not a veto. He was like, really? That's Kaplan? I was like, yeah, that's Kaplan. So again, Kaplan would smile at that and say, see, I had an impact on the Jewish world, especially in America. So anyway, that was sort of so again, and Harold Kushner, that was such a seminal book in the 80s, and not just for Jews. I remember I was working at a hospice, or doing an internship at hospice in New York at the time, and I remember going to a National Hospice Association conference in Minneapolis, mostly non-Jews, and Kushner was the speaker, I'll tell you this.
Keynote?
What?
Keynote?
Thank you. My brain is really turning to mush thanks to this isolation. He was the keynote speaker. I mean, there were thousands of people there. Like I said, most of whom were not Jewish, because this was really powerful for a lot of people. And yet I remember showing it to a friend of mine who was a devout Catholic, and he said, no, that doesn't work for me. I believe that God has a plan for all of us. I've had tragedies happen in my family, and I believe it's part of God's plan, and that they're in a better place. Like, as I said before, Kol hakavod, that's great for you. I'm not going to say that you're wrong. Doesn't work for me and doesn't work for a lot of other people. Let's read this last, the whole, not just the highlighted part, but the whole 2 paragraphs from Kushner. I forgot to cite that. I apologize where that came from. Who wants to read those paragraphs, the Kushner paragraphs?
Okay. God is the light shining in the midst of darkness, not to deny that there is darkness in the world, but to reassure us that we do not have to be afraid of the darkness, because darkness will always yield to light. As theologian David Griffin puts it, God is all-powerful. His power enables people to deal with events beyond their control, and he gives us the strength to do those things because he is with us.
Stop there for 1 second. So again, he's using the word all-powerful there, omnipotent, but he's using it in a very different way. Not God is all-powerful because God can make things happen, but God is all-powerful because God is that energy source that enables us to make things happen, and makes us able to deal with things beyond our control. Very different. So it's a redefinition of omnipotence or all-powerfulness. Tamar, keep going.
God is like a mirror. The mirror never changes, but everybody who looks at it sees something different. Is there an answer to the question of why bad things happen to good people? The response would be to forgive the world for not being perfect, to forgive God for not making a better world, to reach out to the people around us and to go on living despite it all. No longer asking why something happened, but asking how we will respond, what we intend to do now that it has happened.
I'm pretty sure this is from When Bad Things Happen to Good People. So yeah, I mean, to me, that's really powerful. You know, and again, to some people, it's like, yeah, but then you're taking the power away from God. That doesn't work for me. Like, no, you're what we're saying, what he's saying here is that power enables us to, like I said before, to respond to tragedy in the world. And, you know, again, this is sort of metaphor to forgive God for not making the world a better place, or for not making a better world, to reach out to people around us and to go on living despite it all. No longer asking why things happen, but how are we going to respond? And how we respond that's the godliness within us. Wilma.
I always pray for strength to deal with my bad situations.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, that's the most important thing, to have the strength to just go on.
Mm-hmm.
Deal.
Exactly. And it's God that gives us that strength. Again, it's not that, in the Kaplanian sense, it's not God saying, oh, I'm going to give Wilma strength. It's you somehow tapping into that energy force in the universe. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Rami Shapiro's wonderful poetic version of Ahavat Olam, that the love of God, the eternal love, is in the arms, you know, yours are the arm, I can't remember the exact term.
Arms, the hands, the fingers, the voices.
Right. We are the, you know, it's our actions, it's our hugs, it's our helping people, it's all of that brings godliness into the world, that brings God into the world through our godly actions. I'm just, so it's, you know, it's really powerful for me. And then, again, we could look at the Siddur at Kol HaNeshama and see how this sort of figures into our prayer life. But that's actually the next session is on prayer. So I want to be very careful. I was looking at things about God and prayer, and then I realized, oh wait, no, we need the prayers. So that's the part 2 of this conversation is, okay, if we view God this way, what good is prayer? If prayer is usually, you know, it's a combination of thanksgiving, praise, and petition. Petition being asking God for things, praising God for God's actions, and thanking God for God's actions in a traditional sense. If we don't believe that God literally acts in the world, why bother praying? And that's, you know, that's always been a conversation within Reconstructionism. We've certainly talked about it once or twice at services. And that's really going to be the focus of our next session in January. But we have a couple of minutes. Does anybody have any other questions? If there's any unanswered questions, and what I would say is if there are questions that come up after the fact, you can always email me at rabbisteve.nathan@gmail.com, or send it to Liz, or especially if there are questions that are about God that connect to the idea of prayer, and you'd like to see those as questions that we respond to or address next month, to let either Liz or me know, so that I know that that's in the curriculum and in the text for the next session.
Will next month also be open to Sukkot Shalom members?
Absolutely. It's going to be on January 10th, and it's the same Zoom info.
All right.
And I just put the links to the 2 recordings of the first 2 classes in the chat. So if you haven't used links in a chat before, they'll disappear when the meeting ends. So you want to open them now, or copy and paste the whole message.
Right.
Are you finished recording now, I hope?
I will turn it off now. Hang on.
So Sukkot